She waved me over for more salad dressing. Not asked. Waved. The way you wave over a server when your glass is empty and you haven't quite decided to make eye contact yet. My mother-in-law, Margaret, sitting at the head of a table in the private dining hall of the most beautiful resort in the Colorado Rockies, surrounded by her family, lifting 2 fingers in my direction like I was staff. I had been part of this family for 11 years. I had contributed 3 dishes to this exact meal. I had set half of this table, and I walked over and I refilled her dressing, because that is what I had always done in this family. The quiet, practical thing, the useful, invisible thing, the thing that needed doing that everyone assumed I would handle because nobody had ever bothered to. Imagine I might be doing anything else. I refilled her dressing. I went back to my seat. I picked up my coffee and I looked around that dining room. The room where I had been invisible for 11 years. The room with the railing Margaret leaned on every evening after dinner. The room with the windows that looked out over the Rockies at a view that had always been described as theirs. Their resort, their tradition, their special place. And I thought about the documents I had. Signed 6 months ago, the ones with my name on them. The ones that said majority. Owner, they would find out. Tonight, I took a sip of my coffee. My name is Kimberly Thompson. I am a lead consultant for large-scale infrastructure projects, urban development, transportation systems, environmental conservation. I have managed projects worth hundreds of millions of dollars. I have sat across from city officials and engineers and developers and held my own in every room I have ever entered professionally. In my husband's family, I was Ryan's wife. She does something with buildings. I think that is how Margaret introduced me to her golf friends. She does something with buildings, I think. And then she laughed like it was charming rather than dismissive. Like vagueness about another woman's career was a personality trait rather than a choice. I smiled. I always smiled. I had been smiling in this family for 11 years, and I was very, very good at it by the time I bought their favorite place on earth without telling a single one of them. Let me take you back to the beginning, because the beginning is where you understand how someone ends up quiet for 11 years and then does something like this. I married Ryan Thompson when I was 26. He was warm and funny and genuinely kind in the one-on-one way that some people are, the way that doesn't always translate into public spaces or family dynamics or the specific social architecture of a family that has been operating the same way for generations and has no particular interest in renovating. The Thompson family was old money adjacent, not wealthy in the way that makes headlines, but comfortable in the way that makes assumptions about who matters and who doesn't, about what counts as real work, about which people at the table are there to contribute and which are there to be appreciated. I was there to be appreciated. That was clear from the first family retreat. Every summer, the Thompsons gathered at Pinewood Retreat in the Colorado Rockies. Margaret planned everything. She booked the Mountain View cabins first, got early check-in without asking, moved through the resort with the proprietary ease of someone who had decided long ago that this place was an extension of her own home. She knew the former owners. She reminded everyone of this regularly. I walked in the first year with a tray of appetizers I had prepared, and someone said, "Thanks, dear. Can you get the utensils too?" Nobody laughed. Nobody corrected it. I got the utensils. In the years that followed, I hosted Christmas dinners and bought personalized gifts for every family member and remembered every birthday and showed up early and stayed late and was never once mentioned in the family newsletter. I was in the background of photographs. I was the one who knew where the extra napkins were. I was the one who handled the logistics of things without being asked. Because nobody asked. Because the asking had been replaced somewhere along the way by assumption. Ryan didn't notice. I told him once about Margaret's comment to her golf friends. He said, "She means well." I told him about his cousin's joke about my hybrid car. He said, "She means well." I told him about the way his brothers talked business at the dinner table, while the women discussed beach house renovations, and nobody thought to direct a single business question at me. The person at the table who was managing the largest professional projects of anyone in the room. He said, "They mean well." "They mean well" became the sentence that taught me to stop talking. I stopped talking. I kept smiling, and I kept working. Quietly, consistently, building a consulting practice and an investment portfolio and a professional reputation that existed in a completely different world from the one where I was Ryan's wife who does something with buildings. Last summer, Ryan's uncle made a joke about my car. It was not a cruel joke. It was the casual kind. The kind that lands in a room full of people who have never had to think carefully about what their words cost other people. And it got a laugh, and Ryan laughed too. And I sat there watching my husband laugh at a joke about me, and something that had been bending for 11 years finally reached the angle where it snapped. Not loudly. Quietly, which was how everything happened with me. That night I sat on the cabin balcony and I looked at the mountains and I asked myself, for the first time without flinching from the answer, what I was waiting for. The next morning I called Lisa. Lisa and I had worked together years ago, before she moved into real estate acquisitions and started managing a private hospitality fund. She was sharp and direct, and one of the few people in my professional life who had always seen me accurately. "I want to buy a resort," I said. She was quiet for a moment. Then she said, "Of course you do. You always aim high." Within a week we started looking at listings. I did not tell Ryan. There was nothing official yet, and I needed to think. Clearly, and thinking clearly around Ryan had become complicated, because thinking clearly required not managing his comfort at the same time, and I had not yet learned how to do both. 4 months later, we found Pinewood Retreat. It was caught. Between rising property taxes and owners who had lost interest. The specific vulnerability that makes a property available to someone who is paying attention and has the resources to move. Lisa said, "You're not just buying a resort. You're buying their memories and taking control of their special place." I liquidated a significant portion of my investment portfolio. I used consulting fees and dividends I had been building for years. Money that had existed in a world the Thompsons had never thought to ask about. I sold my stake in a tech startup I had invested in quietly at the right moment. We formed a holding company, Evergreen Resorts Holdings, to keep my name off the surface of the transaction. Lisa handled the negotiations, 6 weeks to close. The first morning I walked through Pinewood Retreat as the majority owner. I did it alone before anyone else was awake. I walked through the dining hall where Margaret had once corrected me for misplacing a salt shaker. I ran my hand along the railing she leaned on every evening. I stood at the window and looked at the mountains, and I felt, for the first time in a long time, completely still. Ownership is quiet. That's what nobody tells you. Real power doesn't announce itself. It just is. We made changes over the following months. We upgraded the heating and cooling systems. We raised staff salaries and improved back-of-house operations. We removed the Thompson family from the legacy guest list as part of a policy overhaul, cited in a letter as a standard restructuring, nothing personal. They complained in the family group chat immediately. The charm was gone, someone said. It had lost its personal touch. I read every message. I said nothing. When the summer retreat came around, Margaret booked the same mountain view cabins, assuming the familiarity of 11 years of priority treatment. What she didn't know was that those cabins had been reassigned twice in the new system and reinstated at full price with no legacy discount. A courtesy I had debated removing entirely before deciding that removing it all at once would raise questions too early. I wanted them to find out at dinner, on my timeline, in my dining room. We arrived on a Thursday. Same greetings, same clinking glasses, same air of certainty that this place was theirs and always would be. Nobody noticed that I walked past the front desk without checking in, that I was looking at staff schedules on a resort-issued tablet, that the manager who greeted me differently than he greeted everyone else. They were not looking at me, they never looked at me. The complaints started at the welcome brunch the next morning. Emily said the check-in. Staff was cold. Hannah said the valet took too long. Margaret said the pancakes weren't as good as last year. They were sitting at a table in my dining room, eating food prepared by my staff, complaining about my resort, and I was at the end of the table with my coffee and my tablet and the specific patience of someone who knows exactly how the evening is going to end. That night was the welcome dinner. Margaret had chosen a mountain chic theme. I wore a black dress I had worn to a major business presentation years ago. It fit better now. I sat next to Ryan, who didn't ask where I had been or what I had been doing all day. He had not asked those questions with any real curiosity in years. Halfway through the meal, Ryan's cousin Jake, who had once laughed at my homemade Christmas gifts, made a comment about the new fitness center renovation. Who renovates in the middle of the season? Amateurs, the table agreed. The complaints built on each other the way complaints do in rooms full of people who have never been told no. Each one landing and prompting another. A comfortable performance of discontent from people who expected their discontent to matter. Then Margaret raised her glass. I hope whoever bought this place understands that families like ours built its reputation. I looked at my coffee. I thought about the documents, with my name on them. I set my cup down. I excused myself, telling Ryan I needed some air. He nodded without looking up. I walked out to the terrace. I took out my phone. I called our general manager. "It's time," I said. I watched through the glass doors. Our GM stepped to the front of the dining room. He tapped his glass and the room went the specific quiet of people who understand something is about to be said. "Good evening. Pinewood Retreat has a new majority owner. Please welcome Ms. Kimberly Thompson." I want to tell you about the silence that followed, because it was not one silence. It was many different silences happening simultaneously in the same room. Emily froze with her glass halfway to her mouth. Hannah's mouth opened and nothing came out. Margaret's glass stayed in the air, suspended, like her hand had forgotten what it was doing. Ryan looked like the floor had moved. I walked in from the terrace. Slowly. There was no reason to hurry. I had waited 11 years. I could take 30 more seconds. I walked to the head of the table. My GM handed me the microphone. I looked around that room, at every face that had looked past me for 11 years, at the table where I had been waved over for salad dressing that afternoon, at the railing by the window that Margaret leaned on every evening like it was hers. I said, "Thank you all for your support over the years. This resort has always been a place of tradition. Now it's a place of change. You're all welcome here, just like everyone else. There will be no more special treatment. Our policies apply to everyone equally." I handed the microphone back. I walked out. In the hallway, I stopped and I exhaled. Not victory. Not relief. Release. 11 years of being the invisible, useful woman in someone else's family, released in a single sentence in a room full of people who had never thought to ask who I was. The messages started the next morning. Ryan's cousin Tom texted about his cabin. Hannah sent a message about my hospitality skills, suddenly impressed, suddenly interested in a woman she had ignored for a decade. Margaret called twice. I let it go to voicemail. Ryan came to my door. He stood in the doorway with his hands in his pockets, looking like a man trying to locate the right beginning to a conversation he had no map. 4. "Why didn't you tell me?" he said. I looked at him. "Why didn't you ever ask?" He didn't have an answer, which was, in its own way, the most complete answer he had ever given me. In the days that followed, I handled each situation the way I handle all professional situations. With documentation, with clarity, without cruelty, but without softness where softness would have been dishonest. Emily cornered me about her family's cabin lease. I told her the lease had expired 2 years ago. When she started to explain, I showed her the documentation I had found during our operational review. Evidence of illegal subletting she had been running through the property for 18 months. I gave her my legal team's contact and suggested she find an accountant. Ryan's uncle, who had made the car joke, emailed asking to extend his lease arrangement. I sent him a 30-day notice to vacate and informed him the cabin would be donated to a program housing homeless veterans. Margaret came to me about appearances, about Ryan, about what this would mean for the family. I listened completely. Then I showed her documentation our staff review had surfaced, evidence of how she had treated employees during 11 years of summer retreats, the comments, the demands, the behavior of a woman who had never been told that her presence was a courtesy rather than a right. I told her that if she chose to play the victim publicly, the documentation would become public too. She left looking like a woman who had just understood, for the first time, that the person she had dismissed for 11 years had been paying attention, the whole time. because I had been paying attention to everything. That night I stood at the cocktail party we held for the resort's broader guest community. Behind me, a screen showed the plans for Pinewood's next phase. A mountainside spa, expanded family cabins, a new community center. At the top of the plans was a name, the Grace Women's Fund. Named after my mother, who had worked as a cleaner for 20 years and who had taught me, through her own quiet consistency and her own invisible labor and her own dignity in rooms that did not see her, that respect is not given, it is earned. It is built. It is documented and protected, and eventually, if you are patient enough and precise enough and willing to do the work that nobody is watching, it becomes something that cannot be taken from you. My mother cleaned rooms in hotels her whole career. Her daughter owns one now. Ryan moved out a month later. He left a note. Didn't see you and I should have. I kept it. Not for sentiment. For clarity. Because sometimes the most honest thing a person ever says to you arrives after it is too late for the honesty to change anything. And the only thing to do with it is to receive it accurately and move forward. I moved forward. 3 days after the dinner, I sat alone on the dock at sunrise with my coffee. The mountains were doing what Colorado mountains do in the early morning, which is exist with a completeness that makes everything else feel appropriately small. I was not angry. I had moved through the anger somewhere in the middle of the acquisition process, somewhere between signing the holding company, documents, and walking through the dining hall alone that first morning. What I felt on the dock was something I had not felt in 11 years, fully in view, not in spite of the people who had looked past me for a decade, because of what I had built while they were looking past me. They were busy dismissing me. I was busy building the thing that would make the dismissal irrelevant. Here is what I need you to understand. Invisibility is not a condition that happens to you. In a family like the Thompsons, in a room like that dining hall, invisibility is a system. It is maintained actively through the specific daily choices of people who benefit from not seeing you, through the jokes that go unchallenged and the introductions that leave out your title and the salad, dressing refill that is requested with 2 fingers, because it has never occurred to anyone to consider what else your hands might be holding. The system works because the invisible person cooperates. Cooperated for 11 years. I cooperated. And I smiled and I got the utensils and I refilled the dressing and I sat at the end of the table. And I said nothing. And I built in silence and I waited, with the patience of someone who understands that the right moment is worth more than the right word spoken too soon. The right moment came at dinner, in my dining room, at my resort, in the mountains that I now own. Margaret waved me over for dressing. I own the kitchen it came from, own the table she was sitting at. I own the railing she leaned on every night like it was hers. It was never hers. It is mine. It has been. Mine since the moment I signed the papers. And before that, it was mine in the way that everything you build in silence belongs to you before anyone else knows it. Exists. They thought I was the help. I was the owner the whole time. Was just waiting for the right moment to say. So, subscribe for more stories, where the woman they waved over owned the whole room. See you in the next one.